Our next speaker has been both a mentor and one of my earliest Ruby friends. Contributing to Rails is something that seemed so out of reach for me until he introduced me to source code. He's here today to inspire us by sharing a recent example of going from an odd error message to Rails contribution. Please join me in welcoming Collin Jilbert.
Man, as long as we've been friends, she still messed up my name. More about that, though, in a minute. First of all, thank you all for coming. I appreciate y'all being here. This talk is titled From Cryptic Error Messages to Rails Contributor. First, a little bit about myself, though. My name's Adam Driver. My friends, they do call me Collin, though. You may know me from a few things. First of all, my role is Adam Sackler in Girls, but probably more so my role as Kylo Ren in Star Wars here. Another fun fact about myself, I was once married to Scarlett Johansson. Unfortunately, that didn't work out so well, and I had to pack my bags and move out. It was a pretty dark time in my life, but I pushed onward, got myself a little apartment, and took some time to pursue other interests, one of which was programming with Ruby on Rails. Eventually, I got a wonderful opportunity that took me from the big screen to the small screen, where I joined GoRails. I work on a number of software projects and products, and occasionally make screencasts to share learnings about Ruby and Ruby on Rails. So far, things seem to be going pretty well. Get some nice comments pretty often. Every now and then, too, I get this one about this Dave Grohl character here. Get compared to that one. Anyways, enough about me. I'm not Adam Driver. I hope he doesn't sue me. Let's go ahead and get down to business here. So often finding something to contribute to Rails can be quite a challenge, but there's a lot of opportunity out there if you keep your eyes open and question things and just explore. For example, something I used to do a lot, still do every now and then, is just read the Rails guides every year. I didn't always make it through them completely, but as I read the docs, I learned a lot. I also found a lot of little typos and sentences that could use some clarity. So one of the things I learned in reading those guides is that there's actually a contributing to Ruby on Rails guide, which is very helpful. And so in keeping with the theme of this year's RailsConf, I wanted to make improvements to the docs so that my future self and others, to help aid you in building with Rails. So if you're really looking to get started, first, contributing to the docs is a great way to do it. And seriously, some of my commits are one-letter typo fixes, so don't be scared to make those. But in this talk, we're actually going to be taking it a step further and looking at some code here. So we're going to try to do so by looking at a real-world example, as Julie mentioned, that I recently did. And so let's talk about some prereqs here. First up, basic Rails experience. You made a to-do app, you made a blog post app, you're good. Knowledge of what is true and false in Ruby. If you got that covered, you're well on your way. Lastly, curiosity. Just even question is this something I can improve? Should I do it? We'll see more about that as we go on. Outcomes that I hope you walk away from this talk with are just an increased ability to see, possible contribution opportunities. Additionally, an increased ability to navigate that source code because it's quite large. And then finally, just to feel more confident in your potential to contribute to Rails. So, with all that said, I'm sure we're familiar with the red screen of death here. But these screens can often be very helpful. We can also see these error messages if we look in our server logs where our Rails server is running. So here you can kind of see that second to last line there, that no method error, right? Reading the server logs is really an extremely handy resource to have when you're debugging. If you don't look there often, I suggest you do so and start if you haven't been. So if we read this one, for example, we can follow it and let Rails guide us through solving this error. So here we can see, it's pointing us to that to-dos controller, line 5, that index action. We want to go check that out. We hop over there. There we go. We can see, to-do.sorted. Probably don't have this method defined. So if we pop over to that class, sure enough, there's not much there at all. So with that, like the red screen of death there and the errors in our server logs, they're actually quite helpful, and they, a lot of cases help make it a very smooth debugging experience, or they can, because, that's not always the case. But this experience is like personally how I feel it should always be when you get an error message, if possible, and especially for newer folks, because that red screen can throw a lot of people off. So let's see. Origin of this talk. So we had someone in our Go Rails Discord server who was raising this question to us, and they seemed to think they were having an issue with strong parameters here. Then they shared their code for the strong parameters, which is here. It looked just fine. It's pretty standard, strong parameter method definition there. Then they went on to say, like when I submit my form, I get the following error, which is this action controller parameter missing error. They then added that if they remove that little required part, it worked just fine. They could submit through and not get any error. So I asked them, can you share me that controller action code and also like your view code? Let's try and figure this thing out together. So they did. Here's that index action, right? So you can see what they're doing right there. Here is the code that was in the index page there, right? So what they were doing, they're rendering the form to make a new URL link on the index page, right? So does anybody see like the issue here? And you can feel free to go ahead. There you go. Got it. So that mismatch there, that's actually where the error was stemming from, right? So, I pointed this out to them. They matched it up. All is well. But that error given to them, though, like, admittedly, this one's pretty valid. It had them looking, though, in the wrong place, right? Like, I've made this error myself before, so I knew kind of what most likely was the cause when they showed it to us. But because they weren't looking at that actual, like where the issue was stemming from, it was very confusing for them to try and debug. Let's see here. Oh, so to me, yeah, this error message actually kind of requires a strong understanding of strong parameters and also the naming conventions that Rails uses when presenting forms, which actually there's a section in the Action View Form Helper's Guide about this, about these naming conventions here, right? So to dig into it slightly, when you give it a valid active record model to the model argument for form width, it sets that top level key in your params hash and then nests all the attributes for the associated model under it, right? So additionally, it'll also set the values for form elements to use the class name, and then it'll bracket the actual model attribute names in the markup there. And so we'll see these naming conventions at play here in a moment, but back to the issue. So the real cause, obviously, it's the mismatch, but it's that the @URL link that was being passed is actually nil, right? So this is because when you access an instance variable for the first time that you haven't assigned to, you're going to get back nil, right? And that's just like a Ruby thing, not a Rails thing. So this got me thinking, can and should we improve this experience for everyone? So I think so, and I also think that like anything that you find confusing when you're working with Rails is a good opportunity to explore, seeing if you can improve it and to contribute that back. So let's give it a go. We're going to start, we'll generate a new Rails app here, and we can see a small sampling of the controller here. The main thing to note is that we have that add to do, right? Just like they were doing previously, we're going to put a new to do in memory there to use in the form. Over on the index view, we'll go ahead and pass that over. Quick side note here too, like if your only options that you pass into render right here are going to be partial and locals, you don't have to explicitly write that stuff. Again, mentioning the docs. It's great to read the docs, so you can find some nice little shortcuts there. But back to our code. We can see that the local variable to do is being passed in as the model argument to the form with method, right? If we restart our Rails server and navigate to the page and inspect our form input field, oops, sorry about that, we can see that the naming structure there we talked about, we can see it at play here, right? For that name attribute of the input there. So when we pass an actual active record object to name, or the name and ID attributes get populated for us with those values by Rails. So I want us to make sure, like, we're going to focus in on this name attribute here, though, because this is what's going to be the important piece for us moving forward here. And again, that piece right there is what we're talking about. So let's make a typo here, right? So we'll go from @todo to @to, right? Now, as a quick note here too, that's also common. Like you'll see this a lot. People mess up like pluralization of variables, so you'll get in this situation easily like that too. The other thing we'll do next is right above this line, we're going to add a fail statement right here. So this way we can refresh the page and we can get the web console up and we can kind of look at the two instance variables that we're working with here. So here you can see the one that we assigned in the controller @todo, that's holding our actual to-do instance there, while @to is nil, right? So we can see how that's being introduced. So if we remove that fail call and we refresh the page, we can see now that naming structure for that input field is completely different from what it was, right? There's no more to-do with the brackets wrapping it, right? So if we enter a to-do name and we submit the form, we end up back in the index page, but we don't see our to-do anywhere. And we should see it because the rest of our index view code there is trying to render that collection of to-dos that we're assigning to right here, or we're assigning to in our controller here. So what gives here? Well, if we look in our server logs, we can see that we were successful in recreating that exact error that was being raised, and also the reason why that to-do didn't get created, right? But in all this stuff here, like what's important? So here we can see the form was submitted to the proper URL for going to our create action, which is kind of interesting, like how did it know to go there, right? We'll see more about that later. The next thing here, we can see that the name in our parameters on the name key there for the to-do that we were trying to create, right? We're going to give a talk. Here's our error right here, and then we get these helpful lines of code to like, or references to these lines of code. Go look here. This is where your problem's coming from. And so remember, like this is all happening just because we got nil passed over to our form, right? So this also though got me like a little bit more curious. What happens when you do the same thing in the new template? So let's go do that now. So we'll pop over to our new view. We'll make the same typo. So @to, right? We're not doing @todo. So if we save that file, we navigate to the new page. Before we like go submit our form here, let's look at these two things here, right? So you get that form action is going to submit to /to/new, and then also that same impact with the naming conventions of the that name attribute there have taken place here. So if we fill in the input, submit the form. Oops. We end up back on the index page, but there's still like no sign of our to-do. It's just poof, gone. But if we look in our server logs, we actually see that there's a completely different error here. So to me, this is where I started to feel like this is all kind of getting a little cryptic now, because now we're seeing the same root call is causing two separate issues depending on what context you're dealing with this stuff in, right? So in this situation also, I'm going to say you should probably use form for instead of form with. We'll see more about that later on though. So we're going to stick with form with here. So what we're going to do first is we're going to go find out where that form with method is defined and then like start poking around through the code. There's a couple ways to do this, but we're going to start with a simple one, right? We'll just cruise over to api.rubyonrails.org. You type it in, there it is right there. And that second arrow gives you an idea of where that method is defined at in the Rails code base. Another way we could have found it is if you hop into your Rails console, you can do helper.method, give it the method you want to find, and then call a source location on that. And then that printout at the bottom there tells you like the full path to the file that you need to go, and then in blue is the line number where that method is defined. So anyways, back here, we could read the code here, or we go on GitHub and view it, but we're probably going to want to attempt to like manipulate this and change it up a little bit and see if we can, you know, provide some better help here. So we're going to go ahead and do it up, open it up locally, and we can do that in our terminal. We can pop over there and we can run bundle open action view, right? So this command will open up a source directory for a gem in your bundle. In our case, in our gem file, it contains Rails, which is a gem of gems, one of which is action view right there. So we can open it up, read the code, we can change it up and see what happens, right? So we run that command, it'll open up in our editor. We need to go into the lib directory, and then remember that naming, that second arrow that I said take note of, like this is where it's kind of telling you this method is defined. You can use that to trace through the code here. So we'll go into action view. The next one was helpers, and then we're going to go into that form helper file right there. Now, you could probably be fancy and do like a global search and get there a lot quicker, but that's not really any fun. Like you want let's ride the road here and really figure out how this structures, how the Rails app's structured here. But once inside that file, we can do a search for the form with method. There it is, sure enough, line 755. Something to note here now, the comments above this method, that's all the documentation for the method, and it's a good thing to read that stuff because we're going to see an answer to one of our questions that we were thinking about earlier. So right here, these two highlighted sections, they're basically telling us why that form tried to submit to /todos and /todos new without us telling it to. So normally when you pass like an actual active record object as the model argument, form with knows how to infer the URL and scope. But in our case, when we're passing nil, it doesn't know what to do with it. So by default then, it's just going to render or try to submit to whatever the current URL is. So that explains why previously we went to those two URL paths there. So we can go ahead now, let's shift and read some of the form with code here. So note here that the model argument has a default value of nil, right? Because it's optional, you don't have to pass it. The next thing I want to focus on is this first conditional statement in the method here, right? So let's see. If model. So who can tell me like when we're going to get inside the body of this conditional? 1, 2, 3, or all at once? Go for it. Yeah, there you go. Right. And we're going to get into, we won't hit it when it's false, right? So Ruby only considers what to be false? Nil and false. Perfect. So let's see. We came here, right? Let's remember why we came here. We want to know like when someone explicitly passes in nil to this model argument, or whether like they do it on purpose or accidentally. So, and that's all we want to change right here. We want the code to still function the same, but we don't want to change that behavior. So like given what we just said, what can we do here in order to do that? Anybody have any ideas here? We can just change this default of nil to the default of false. Not that complex, right? So now we can simply check first, like, now is model nil? And if so, we can just raise that error, provide them a nice little message here. And so if we change, we make this change, we save our file, we can restart our Rails server. And if you try to go to either URL, we should see our error screen, and we do, right? So it seems now we've accomplished our goal of being able to catch it early so that someone doesn't submit the form, realize, think like what the hell happened here and have to go sift through logs to try and figure it out. We can just stop them now when that form tries to render right out the gate. So we've done what we've came here to do. We can go ahead and give ourselves a nice little round of applause here. So now we need to we can go make this change in Rails itself, but we want to make sure to put our code back the way it was locally, that action view stuff that we changed. So if you have like the ability still, you can just like undo it or whatever. If you can't, you can run gem pristine action view. You can give it a specific version if you want to, and it will return to its pristine state, fresh and clean. So now we need to go and actually change the Rails source code so that we can open up a pull request and submit this thing and see if they'll take it. So this is also where that contributing guide comes in quite handy. It'll walk you through here in section 5. It walks you through everything you need to know to make that contribution. But basically, we just want to clone the Rails repository, make a branch for our proposed changes, bundle install. All the commands, again, they're all right there. So another great thing, though, about this section is in 5.4 here, it tells you that basically you can do all the stuff we just did without having to worry about messing up your local install, right? You can spin up a dummy app and experiment and make the same changes and see how they work for you. So regardless, I wanted to show the bundle open way because if you're working with other gems in your app and you're having issues with them, it comes in handy to be able to do that so you can, crack them open and try and figure out your own issues with the code. So let's see, after we've done all that, we'll clone Rails, made a branch, maybe you went the dummy application route, whatever. Let's imagine we went ahead and we did the same exact code change, nothing different. So now we need to go run our tests, and there's actually a section in the guide, that contributing guide, that tells you how to do it. You can run the whole Rails test suite, or you can just do it for a particular component. We'll just do it for a particular component in our case, So you can just cd into action view, bin test, you're on your way. Now though, with our change, there's actually a number of failures. Here's one of them. And what's interesting here is that you can see there's some lines here that point to form 4. So this test is actually testing the form 4 method, but if you don't know already, form 4 actually calls form with under the hood here. We'll see that in a second. There we go. So when it calls form with, it just forwards along everything it's set up in the method body that I've kind of just got out the way here just for clarity. It forwards everything off to form with right here, okay? So that's why we're seeing some failures here, is because of the change that we just made. But if we go look at that test, the bit that I've highlighted here, that's the only relevant bit for us. So this test calling form with passes the symbol of post, right? If we keep this in mind and we go back to form 4 and we kind of walk through this, we can see here that the first argument to form 4 is referred to as record, right? This is that argument that the test passed that post symbol to. And now if we go look at the case statement here, inside, I've expanded the form 4, showing a little more code now. So this case statement here, we'll see that we'll hit the first one. And look at that first line inside that first when condition here. So it assigns nil to a variable named model, right? So there's also something else super important to see here, and it's this bit right here. So that third line, that else clause, it's doing basically the same thing that we just added to form with already, right? So, initially I was like, I don't really know if this is going to be like a valid contribution here, but the fact that they were already doing it in form with kind of made me feel pretty good. Like, yeah, we should probably do this, because now we'll get consistent behavior between both of those, right? This is also why previously I mentioned, like, you should probably use form 4 if you're going to be passing active record objects to that, because it would have caught that error previously. So continuing on, that model variable later gets assigned to a model key and an options hash. Ultimately, like I said previously, that all gets forwarded along to form with, and that's why that test is failing now, because we've now said, like, hey, we're going to raise errors every time you try and pass that to us. So we now need to actually make an additional change here in form with, which is actually just the same change we made in the default value for the model argument in form with. So let's go from nil to false, run the tests, and we're at a nice little sea of green here. Everything's kosher. So since we changed something, though, we need to actually write a test for it. They'll mention that in the contributing guide. You can see that. You don't have to let that be scary, because I guarantee you there's probably like existing examples you can use to write your tests, given that there are some tests. Anyways, so and for our case, there already is, so that there's a test file for form with. You could reference that if you needed. Ours isn't super complex that we need to do. So right here, we'll just assert that when you pass nil, an argument error is raised, and then we'll save that off to a variable for error. And then we can check that the messages match what we expect, right? So now we can rerun our tests, and we're back to a sea of green here, which is lovely. So now we're ready to wrap this thing up, open a pull request, and hopefully get it, merged in. So the contributing guide, like I said, like that'll walk you through all of that stuff. If you've never done that before, it's great to have a handy reference to it. But as I mentioned in the beginning, like this was a real world example, so I went ahead and did this. It was merged into Rails here, but then came along this fellow. Second day RailsConf Detroit 2024 keynote speaker John Hawthorne. So John, after it was merged in, came in and said that, hey, this is actually a breaking change. We should probably go ahead and deprecate this first. And I agree with him. That was probably a good call. I probably should have thought of that from the beginning, but what are you going to do? So this will most likely happen, if you're opening a PR or whatever, and, just something to be, expecting. But everyone's super helpful. Most people will be happy to help you out. So I went ahead and made the changes John requested in this PR here. Essentially, just now, instead of raising the argument error on the right, you can see that we use the action view deprecator to warn and say, hey, this behavior is deprecated, going to be going in the next version of Rails. Our test, we also changed as well, which I actually didn't know there was an assert deprecated method until I had to do this. So it's kind of fun to know. So we went ahead and did that. And so now, what next, right? So that initial behavior, raising that argument error, that still needs to happen after the next version of Rails is released. And someone needs to do it. Of course, like I have it on my list to do, but then I kind of like had a thought here of like, now that this talk's happened, this like knowledge isn't siloed to me anymore. I've already gotten a couple of little contributions, so I have a gift. So before you go doing what I'm about to tell you, if you haven't got, or if you have had a contribution before and you get this, give it to somebody else, let them take it. But underneath 2 chairs in the audience, there's 2 golden tickets. No lie. The first of which is for a year's subscription to GoRails. Talk to me afterwards, and we'll make sure we get that all set up. The other one is for this commit into Rails, so you can go ahead and have that. You might have to do a little hunting and pecking now, because I actually don't remember where I put them, but I don't think I don't think anybody's sitting in the seats though. Actually, there it is. Which one did you get? You don't, if you care to share. Yeah. No problem. We'll come back to it. Oh, we got number 2. Okay. Oh yeah, yeah. You didn't cut it off, did you? It's like, I think it's a federal offense or something. All right, right. So that means you got the commit. Excellent. Very cool. Yeah. So yes, I mean, so that's that. You know, and with the hack day tomorrow, like I hope this talk's giving you like a few tools and techniques you can use to kind of poke around the Rails code. And yeah, I also hope it's like inspired you to kind of step back and open your eyes a little more and like question when you hit errors if you can do anything to improve them, not just for yourself, but for all like future, you know, members of the community. So with that, that's it. I really appreciate it. Thank you.